Hello and welcome back to the Breathe Better podcast. In this episode, I'd actually like to talk a little bit about the Yoga Sutras and sort of looking at our relationship with ourselves and how yoga can sort of change our perception of ourselves and change our perception of a lot of things, really, but really it can enhance our relationship with ourselves through philosophy, through reading, through the practices, through breathwork meditation, all of this stuff. Yoga just as a whole. And I have with me a book called Inside the Yoga Sutras by Jaganath Carrera. And he's got some really, really lovely quotes in here, which I'm actually going to start the episode out with. But the first thing I would like to do is, before we get into the quotes, and just let me refresh my memory when we get back to the first two sutras. Now, the first sutra is Atha Yoga Anushashanam, which essentially means now the teachings of yoga are presented. And this is the very first sutra, and this, obviously, with it being a sutra, this is telling the reader what is going to be coming up. So obviously the sutras are going to be about yoga. So the teachings of yoga are about to be presented. There's a lot of interpretation that comes with this, because if you've ever studied the sutras or looked at the sutras, they're pretty cryptic. Like, that's in nature, sutras are quite cryptic. So they normally come along with a commentary, and the main commentary that comes with the Yoga Sutras was from someone called Vyasa. Now, Vyasa was also meant to have told the story of the Mahabharata as well. So there's a bit of sort of mythology belief there as well, which is actually really, really cool and really interesting. Now, with this first sutra, Atha Yoga Anushashanam, now the teachings of yoga are presented, there's a bit of an interpretation saying that, now, you know all of the stuff coming up to now about yoga, but now we're going to get into it. Now we're going to get into the sort of sticky stuff, the meditation, the philosophies, that ties in with Samkhya, all that sort of thing. So whatever you know about yoga before, like, if you imagine it as a teacher going like, he's shown you something, a lecture, whatever it is. He's told you an amount of stuff, and then he goes, right, now let's get into this sort of stuff. And that's how I like to perceive this. So it's taking into account that there is lots of stuff that's been taught about yoga before, but now we're getting into Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Now, coming into the second sutra, as you can expect, we've had the first one, which says what the sutras are going to be about. The second one outlines what yoga is, and I just need to refresh my memory. I think it's Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Apologies, my Sanskrit is not very good at all. Now, the main thing here is that I need to outline a couple of different words. So Chitta is sort of the mind stuff, referring to the mind, the ego, mental afflictions, all this sort of stuff. Nirodha means the cultivation of stillness of the mind and the cessation of misidentification with mental modifications, all that sort of stuff. And I just realised I didn't actually tell you what the second sutra means. So, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha means the cessation of the vrittis of the mind, coming into stillness, essentially. That's not a word for word translation, but stilling of the vrittis of the mind, or stilling of the fluctuations of the mind, and coming into experience this thing called Nirodha, which, as I say, is a cultivation of stillness in the mind. And when you're sort of coming to yoga and you're just doing postural classes, as that's most people's doorway into yoga, you don't have a fucking clue about any of this. And once you start to hear about it or read about it, it's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? But it is integral. It's a massive, massive part, and I personally believe you can't really be practicing yoga if you don't look into the tradition and the history. Like, yes, we're of course performing asana, we're maybe doing breathwork, meditation, pranayama, all that stuff, and we are essentially practicing it. Things might be happening internally that we're not aware of, but I think the biggest thing is becoming aware. So reading into these things, reading into the scriptures, reading into the philosophies, the texts, all this sort of stuff, and becoming immersed in it. Now, you don't necessarily have to believe it, but I think it's really important to have this stuff to inform your practice. Yeah? So I want to refer back to, with that being said, I want to refer back to Vrittis. So Vrittis are essentially fluctuations of the mind. They're mental activities, if you will, they're thoughts, they're mind stuff, experiences, and attempts to understand and organise experiences of life. They're formed under the influence of like ignorance, you know, and a lot of other things as well. They're not necessarily, and they're not all bad. Not all vrittis are negative, and Patanjali does actually go into talking about that as well and outlining all the different vrittis and all that sort of stuff. But the reason that I'm telling you all of this stuff is because I want to get to a really lovely quote, and all of this chitta vritti Nirodha stuff will come to make sense in time. And I would like to drop into the sutras quite regularly, because this is the main body of text that I pull a lot of my teachings from when combined with Hatha Yoga as well. So my physical practice is Hatha, but I draw a lot of my teachings from Samkhya and the philosophy of, not the philosophy, sorry, but the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and Samkhya are sort of like sister sciences, if you know what I mean. Patanjali draws a lot of his philosophical beliefs from Samkhya. So to have an understanding of the Yoga Sutras, it helps to have an understanding of Samkhya philosophy as well. Now, yoga itself is a darshana, a darshana of India, which is a philosophical school. I think the word is darshana, but anyway, it's one of the 6 main philosophical schools of India, and Samkhya is also another one. So apologies if I'm getting a bit off track here, but the Yoga Sutras is where, to summarise, the Yoga Sutras is where I pull a lot of my knowledge from, and it's where I started to really see a change in how I perceived myself and how I came to understand myself and this world, this sort of universe that, like, it's a very difficult thing for me to describe. And I promise you I will get back to talking about how this is going to help change your relationship with yourself. So I'll add a little bit of personality into this. So I never really had much belief growing up. I was raised in Scotland, so we had sort of Christianity weaved into school, if you like. We went down to church on Easter and Christmas and these sort of times, and we sang hymns on Fridays, and it was a bit weird. I wasn't personally, not to say that Christianity is weird. I think it's a bit I'm not too sure of the word, but I didn't really like the fact that it was weaved into an educational system. And I think it's important to educate ourselves on religion and moral studies and ethical beliefs and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that, but back to the point. So I was never really raised with a firm belief. My parents weren't necessarily very religious or had any beliefs that I was made aware of. So I was very much just an open book. I kind of considered myself to be an atheist for a very, very long time, up until my teenage years, and then I still considered myself to be an atheist. Still did back then. Now, of course, my beliefs have sort of changed, and I've sort of created some beliefs of my own as well. So when I started reading about yoga and Buddhism in particular, I was really intrigued. I was really intrigued as to all of this stuff, all of this knowledge, and I was just completely dumbfounded at how undogmatic it was and how easy to read some of this stuff was. And the thing that struck me the most was how much this stuff made sense. Like, really made sense to me. It really, really made sense. And that is the biggest thing. That was the biggest thing. So coming to understand it was really difficult, and it was quite easy to misinterpret things because, as I say, the Yoga Sutras are quite cryptic. A lot of the yoga teachings can be quite cryptic unless you're taught by a teacher or you have someone who can help sort of explain it, or stuff like that. So the main thing that I came to understand was this idea of the self. So that I myself am a physical body. There's also there's a subtle body underneath and included in it, and there's the self, right? There's this pure, unwavering consciousness, or Purusha, that Patanjali would call it, at the very, very core of all. And that Purusha is what brings life into this physical body. It is the very core of it. It's the very, very core. That's always there. It's always unwavering. And this is what we're trying to connect with when we're practicing yoga, or at least in a classical form. This is what we're trying to connect with when we're practicing yoga and meditation, is we're trying to connect with that deep, deep self where there's nothing but sort of contentment and peace and stillness, and you're sort of reconnecting with source, I like to call it, because in my head that's the very energy that makes up the whole universe. Yeah, so you're trying to reconnect with that very source, going back to like root, going back to the very, very root, that thing that breathes life into every cell in your body, is how I like to think of it. And coming to understand that that was there, that was sort of unwavering, always there, underneath all the surface, underneath all the like anxiety, all the bullshit, all the addiction, all of the desires, all of this stuff, all of these afflictions and thoughts and stuff like that. There was something that was just always there, always unwavering, and completely constant. And it kind of blew me away because I'd never heard of anything like this. And the more I read into it and the more I saw connections between other traditions and things like that, it really sank in, and it was just such a profound thing, and it really resonated with me. And the whole idea of samsara and these sort of endless life cycles, right? And we use yoga, and this is going back to classical terms once again, but we use yoga to sort of end that samsara, end that constant constant reincarnation, right? We're trying to connect back to the cosmos. We're trying to like stop our reincarnation. We're trying to cease the amount of karmas that we have on this earth in this life, which is a very difficult job, and you're probably not going to be able to do it in one lifetime. However, with yoga and this process, we're trying to sort of cease further karma from occurring while dealing with the karmas that have already been presented to us within this life, that might have even been caused from our past life, or the life before that, or the life before that, or before that, or before that. And once we eventually achieve this monumental task, essentially we'll return back to the sort of source, right? Potentially. This is how I come to understand it anyway. Like, once again, personal understanding here. So coming to understand that the self is here, right? So as much as I suffer from depression, and I have an anxiety disorder, and I have ADHD, and all of this sort of stuff, as much as this is here, there is a part of me that's not like that. Very, very, very deep inside. Very, very deep inside. And that's just sort of... I don't even know how to further describe what I was going to say. But what I would like to do now is read you this quote from inside the Yoga Sutras about how we perceive ourselves and all that sort of stuff. Now, I'm just going to start reading it off for you. So ultimately, Nirodha leads to the transcendence of all of our psychological limitations and the direct realization of the individual as Purusha, or the self. So we're coming to realize essentially that we are this self. Yeah. And then how does this occur? Now imagine that you have never seen your own face. You've heard that it's beautiful, and now you've developed a longing to see it for yourself, but you can't see your face because it is the face that does the seeing. If you want to see your face, obviously you'll need a mirror to reflect the image back to you. But to see you as you truly are, the mirror needs to be free of distortion and dirt. If you look at your reflection in a cracked, warped, or unclean mirror, you won't see your face as it is. You'll see a distorted image, perceiving that you are deformed. You become disheartened. Obviously. It should be obvious that you are fine, and that the distorted image is due to a deformed mirror, but you persist in identifying with the reflected image. And this is where Patanjali comes in, right? He knows that your misery is caused by confusing the reflected image with the self, and begins gently to guide you out of ignorance. He doesn't spend much time talking about the nature of your face, but instead suggests practices for gently but surely cleaning and straightening the mirror as you persevere. The changes in the mirror cause the reflected image to change. Little by little, a divine image emerges. When the mirror becomes perfectly straight, your face is revealed to you, and as it has always been. Now in this instance, the mind is the mirror in which we perceive ourselves. If it is distorted by Vrittis, We often see ourselves as limited, frail beings, not one with the self, not fully connected to that self that I've been talking about. We are fooled by the reflection in the mind mirror again and again, missing the truth of who we really are. Vrittis swarm like locusts, clouding our discriminative faculty and reinforcing the faulty self-assessment that ignorance impresses on us. Nirodha is the means to regain the memory of who we truly are. We cease to identify with the Vrittis, and we realise that all of our turmoil, fears, doubts, depression are in our mind, not in that deep self that I was talking about earlier. Okay, now that is a quote that knocked me for absolute six, and I only got introduced to that quote in my yoga teacher training, so that was only, let's say, 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago now, and it really changed my outlook on myself. So, as I maybe briefly mentioned, or maybe I actually haven't, I've recorded a few of these podcasts that never actually made it to air because of sort of mic difficulties and it was buzzing and all that sort of bollocks. So, excuse me if I say something that I'm referring back to that I've not actually shared with you. But I only really came to realise that I was depressed and had an anxiety disorder in my 20s, and it wasn't until then that everything started to unravel and unfold, and I just became... It was like becoming aware again. It was like a veil of ignorance was lifted, and I was starting to understand what the pains in my chest were. I was reading stories and hearing things, and I was like, well, hang on, my mind's like that. I feel like that all the time when people were talking about anxiety, and I was like, does that mean I'm anxious? And I was like, surely not. I don't want to identify with that just because I don't feel like I deserve that identification. I didn't want to say that I was depressed because I was like, no, I that's unfair to the people who actually are depressed, And when I came to leave my first job as a head chef, because my mental health was deteriorating so much and my life was falling apart, I went to the doctors, obviously, to say what was going on. He was like, oh, well, we'll refer you to... it was a company called Changes, a very, very, very good company, organisation, that help with mental health and counselling and all that sort of stuff. And that was the first step into counselling, was through that. And I remember hearing them say, yeah, it definitely sounds like you're depressed and you have anxiety and all this sort of stuff. And it was, obviously these aren't the exact words, but it was so strange to hear all that. And so strange to think that for so long I didn't know that was there. That had been going on underneath. And then since then, it's just been this journey of sort of self-discovery, if you will, or enhancing my awareness of what's going on under the surface. And it wasn't until this year, so fast forward 3 years after this. Oh, wait, hang on. Sorry. So I first went to the doctors when I was 22. So I'm now 28. So fast forward 6 years after this diagnosis of depression and anxiety, I have started this journey to be diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm essentially just waiting for a psychiatrist to tell me formally that I have ADHD, and that the depression, the anxiety, all of this stuff that I've dealt with my entire life for 28 years could essentially be because they're just symptoms of ADHD. Or not just, but they're symptoms of ADHD, and that's what's causing the problems. And this is very much something that I believe. Now, this is where our wires can get a little bit crossed, or I've crossed my wires with this one anyway, and sort of had to unpick them through therapy. Now, I remember a conversation I had with my therapist when I was reading the Yoga Sutras again, and I was sort of going through it. And I was talking to her, and I was saying that I was conflicted, essentially. I was like, I know that I am this self, right? That there's this self within me that is unwavering, and it's not affected by the depression, it's not affected by the anxiety, it's not affected by the cringy moments I done when I was a teenager in school. It's not affected by that. It doesn't even touch the fucking surface. But here I am with anxiety, with depression, constantly thinking about all the cringy things that I've done over the years, all of the nonsense, all of the shit that I've spoken, all of the things that I've said that were wrong, that I shouldn't have said all those years ago. So how do I was just conflicted. I was like, which you know, do I do I like continue to identify with all of this stuff, or can I simply just like stop identifying with the fact that I'm depressed or anxious or this or that, and stop thinking about it and focus more on just turning my attention to feeling, or trying to peel back the layers to get back to that sense or feeling of unwavering self, to connect back to it. Sorry, that's what I'm trying to say. Or do I just connect back to it and stop all of this deep inner work? And obviously, you can imagine the answer was no. You don't just stop identifying with all this stuff. These things affect the physical body that you're in, so you have to face them, you have to deal with them. You can't just ignore them. And I think this is a massive thing within this toxic positivity that we see. It's like we can't just let things go. We can't just forget about them. And that's huge, especially in the yoga world. We can't just let things go. We can't just forget about them. We have to pay attention to the things that are coming up for our physical body, for our minds, in each and every moment. You know, we talk about presence. We have to be present, of course, with our body, with the world around us, with our thoughts. Or not necessarily with our thoughts, but with the circumstances that we are given. We have to be present for them. We have to feel them. We have to be there for them. They're what make us unique as a person. They're what define our personality, essentially. Not fully, but to a degree. So I think this is just a little bit of the confusion that can come with reading into the Yoga Sutras. And this is why it's so important to have commentaries, right? And teachers who can shed a little bit of light or their own experience on things. Because I myself have had a lot of issues when reading yoga philosophy and history and texts and stuff, where you don't really understand some of the context. And then if you take it out of context, you can kind of just like gloss over things and just try and interpretate it, but it doesn't quite sit properly, and it can cause some cross wires. So that's just a little story that I wanted to talk about specifically in this one. And I think the journey of yoga is not an easy one. It's hard, as I mentioned, as I definitely mentioned in the first episode, right? It can be dark, it can be hard. You can see parts of yourself that you don't want to see, and there's an element of delayering, right? You're peeling off these layers of ignorance that you have about yourself, of the world, of other people, of this, that, blah, 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 blah. And in that, you're seeing things as they are. You're seeing things as they truly are. Yourself as you truly are. Which is hard. It's really hard. So, my mind's just gone completely blank. There was a point there, that's just the ADHD. No, it's completely gone. I can't remember where I was going. Bear with me. Sorry, we're seeing ourselves as we truly are. And yeah, I'm going to take it back to how yoga does this. Right, that's what I'm going back to. I apologise for that very, very long, weird pause. So yoga is a journey, okay? It takes a very, very long time. It's a lifelong journey. If you're actually committed to it, you will get results. You will see benefits, right? You'll see benefits from your first yoga class, your first hour. You know, that's how potent this practice is. And I think it doesn't matter how you get into yoga. It doesn't matter what door you go through. All paths effectively lead to the same thing. Yeah? All paths lead to the same thing. Whether it's enlightenment, or just a deeper awareness of yourself, or the cessation of samsara, and stopping this reincarnation, whatever it is. Whether it's just deepening an awareness of yourself, maybe it's breathing better, moving better, feeling better. Through the process, you will come to understand yourself better. You will come to understand, for instance, how your body moves, how your limbs move, how balanced you are, how stable you are on your feet, how good your balance is, like the tone of your mental narrative, if you have one. Like, how negative is that? How supportive is that? You know, you'll learn to understand the themes of your own thoughts, the streams of your own thoughts, like thoughts that keep coming up over and over and over again. And you'll understand how your body adapts to stress, and you'll understand how your body adapts and reacts to certain situations, to certain poses. You'll understand what happens when you twist your body in a certain way. You'll understand so much about yourself. And then if you start to reflect, and if you start to read into the text and into the sutras or into the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Purana or the Puranas, the Mahabharata, the epics, you will come to understand yourself. Whether you do that through the stories of the Mahabharata, as I say, or if you do it through like intense, slightly more intense, comprehensive scripture. That path's entirely up to you, and that's your journey. But this is just a part of the puzzle. This is how yoga can help us build a better relationship with ourselves, or deepen our relationship with ourselves. For some it might start with the body, and some it might start with the breath, or some it might start with meditation. And they'll probably converge at one point if you decide to dabble or whatever, or stick with one modality. Maybe you just stick with pranayama, or maybe you just stick with movement, or whatever. But you will build and develop a better relationship with yourself through this process. And I think that's the main point that I'm trying to get across in this episode, is sharing some insights from the first 2 Yoga Sutras about how we perceive ourselves. And I guess by peeling back these layers of sort of ignorance and changing our perception of ourselves and starting to see ourselves for how we truly are, just as Mr. Carrera very well put, or very well outlined in his commentary on the Yoga Sutras, just like that we will start to see ourselves in a different light. We'll start to see ourselves a little bit purer, or that maybe just because we have depression doesn't mean that that's all that makes us. That's all who we are. That's the only thing that we are, sorry. We don't have any interests, and we don't have any self-worth, and we don't have any this or that, or we're not worthy of love. Like, all of these narratives that we can tell ourselves, they're just vrittis. They're just thoughts. We don't have to identify with thoughts. They'll come, they go, they fluctuate. They might be positive, they might be negative. For myself, I know most of them have been very negative for a very, very long time, until the past couple of years. But they are only temporary. They do come, they do go, and I don't have to identify with them if I don't want to. And it can be harder for a lot of people. I consider myself to be a slightly easier case, where all of this stuff works for me. Therapy has made a massive difference, and yoga has made a big, big difference as well. But I came on leaps and bounds when I started doing therapy. I really started to build more confidence. I really started to become a bit more aware of what was considered to be toxic positivity, what was considered to be, actual stuff that I could implement in my life. And I was given tools that I could genuinely use. Now, yoga obviously offers us tools, but I was given ones through therapy that I couldn't, even imagine. Ones that are really, really helpful at keeping me grounded and present, and ones that help me communicate better in my relationships. Now, yoga doesn't necessarily teach me that. Yeah, yoga can do so much, but we have to do a lot more of the work ourselves. It can really, really help, and it can provide an outline, a framework. It can provide something to stick to. It can provide something to keep coming back to, which is going to be something that I'll talk about in my next podcast in the future, another episode. But yeah, it can just be such a profound thing, and I just want it to be, I guess that's all I really wanted to talk about, because my mind's starting to do that thing where it's starting to repeat things and go blank, which means I've effectively covered everything that I wanted to talk about, I think. So, yeah, with all of that being said, we can perceive ourselves to be something that's not necessarily true. Yeah, we can identify with that thought, we can identify with that thing that someone's told us about ourselves. That isn't true. It's just someone else's perception, or it's someone else's false perception, or it's your own false perception. You don't need to identify with that. And the more we can come to understand ourselves, all of these aspects of ourselves, of how we are, our vrittis, our thought makeup, our just the way that we are, and we have to come to terms with some things that we don't necessarily like about ourselves. And one thing I'll admit to say is that I can be a very spiteful person. I can be a very, very spiteful person, and it's hard to accept that. It is hard to accept that, but only in accepting it can I learn to work with it. The more I resist it, I'm not going to get anywhere. So, yeah, with all that being said, thank you for listening. And for my next episode, I actually have a special guest, which should be for my next episode. If it's not for my next one, it is going to be coming up in the one after. So stay tuned for that. And once again, thanks very much for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your day.